So students, so far as we've looked at Excel, we've looked at basic formulas and functions in Excel. We've looked at the payment function, right, which is that loan function. We looked at what if we borrowed 20 grand for a car at 4.99%, financed over 7 years. That's a traditional loan. The interest is compounded, all right? Now, that's what makes those payments so high. But we did that, you understand that, and from here on out, you should never take out a loan of any sort without running it through a spreadsheet so that you understand how much interest you're paying, okay? And remember, I've said in prior lectures, interest is calculated based on your credit rating, right? So the higher the credit score you have, the less interest you're going to be pay because you're a smaller risk. Now, we also turned this around and looked at what if we're an investor and we invest, say, $100 at 5.99% for 40 years. We saw the reverse of compounded interest, which is how that interest compounds and how we earn interest on our interest throughout the life of the loan. And if you remember when we looked at that idea of retiring with $2 million, we started with the 100, we goal seek that to 2 million. And yes, we had to put in $1,000 a month, but when we looked at that, we ended up putting in, I think it was $500,000, but at the end of the loan, or at the end of the investment, we had $2 million. So literally, we put in $500,000 and $1.5 million was compounded interest. And that to me, still today, is amazing. That's why I started investing young and continue to invest, because I had somebody that showed me that, and I hope and I'm encouraging you to do the same by what I've shown you in this class. Now, our final project for Excel Module 4 is going to be a student loan calculator. Now, as you see right up top, it says disclaimer. Do not rely on this assignment to calculate your exact loan and payments, okay? And I want to explain why. I consider myself a pretty intelligent person, and as I went out to do hours and hours worth of research after financial aid gave me the information you saw here, I still couldn't quite understand exactly how interest accrues as we make payments. Now, we've talked about compound interest, and what makes this unique is this loan calculator uses simple interest, okay? And we'll look at what simple interest is as we go through this. So this is some information, wonderful, wonderful information that our financial aid department gave. Again, disclaimer for them, this may not be accurate when you take out your loan, okay? This is a snapshot in time. But if you notice, there's a couple different things with loans. First of all, there's these subsidized and unsubsidized. Well, subsidized loans do not start to accrue interest. We'll go down here and see. Interest begins at first payment, okay? Not when we take out the money. But unsubsidized loans, interest actually starts to accrue the day we take out the money, for lack of a better term, okay? Now, you'll also see that there's amounts that can be borrowed if you're dependent, which means as a dependent, somebody helps support you, or independent, you're responsible for supporting yourself, okay? Now, when I did this assignment, 22-23, interest rates on student loans, 4.99%, okay? Annual percentage rate. That's the annual percentage for a year. Now, there's this origination fee. I'm going to cover this briefly, but we're not going to embed it into the assignment. It's just going to make things a little bit more complex. But an origination fee is basically this, as I understand it from the financial aid department. Let's say I'm a dependent. I take out $3,500 plus I take out the $2,000, okay? That's the total. Now, what I mean by that is that's the total annual amount I can take. I actually will take this in 3 terms, as we'll see, as noted down here. The $3,500 divided by 3 terms, I take out $1,166 per term, okay? But notice with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my $5,500, which is the total if I'm a dependent that I can take out, times this origination percentage rate. It's going to cost me essentially $58 in processing fee to borrow the $5,500. What do I actually net? How much am I actually going to get? I'm going to get the $5,500 minus the $5,800, and there is $5,441 essentially. Okay. Now from this, the first thing I got to pay is tuition and fees. And why would I take out more? And a lot of people do this because they live off of this loan amount. As they're going to school, they live off of the loan. Maybe they don't want to work at all. Maybe they live in the dorms and they need to pay this. Maybe they work a little bit and they have that money to spend, but their living expenses come out of here. Now we're going to see where people have gotten in trouble with student loans. So we have all this information here. We understand this is interest generating from the day we take it. This doesn't start generating interest till basically the day we pay it back. Okay. We're also going to use the standard 10-year repayment length, and we're going to look at what happens if you only pay the $50 a month, as I understand it from my research. All right, so let's dive in. In the second sheet, let's open up the second sheet, my total and interest. What we see here is that we've got some dates, okay, some standard inputs. So if you're doing this in another term, you didn't take out money fall, you started in winter, whatever, you can change these dates, okay? But we're going to look at a traditional student, an independent student. So remember, independent was these amounts here, and these amounts for the second year. Notice it increases a little bit, okay? So we're going to look at an independent. And so I'm going to say this is me, and in the first term, I took out the max. I'm taking out the max each time, and there's a date. Now, if you remember, some of these earn interest, okay? Earn interest. And if you notice, I have a graduation date here. So I've got a first year, a second year. Go ahead and audit that. You'll see that I made a mistake right here. Let's go ahead and correct that. There we are. This is why we audit our work, right? So I'm taking out money in September, January, and then April, all right? So there we go. We have that. And if you notice, let me do a control tilde here. I've already filled this in. These dates, I've filled these in by referencing this, right? So if we double click on this, we see it references that date, this one, that date, this one, that date accordingly. Now, we need to figure out, because unsubsidized, we don't have to worry about interest right now, but the day I started taking this out, until the day I graduate, it is earning interest. It's earning simple interest, okay, which we'll calculate here in a minute by figuring out a daily interest. But first we want to figure out the days. Well, there's actually a formula called days, so I say equals days, okay? And matter of fact, let me do this the way I want you to do it, which is to come up here and use the function dialog box for days. Because when I use the days, it says end date. End date is going to be the day I graduate. Okay, that's the day the interest is, well, basically is accrued until. Okay, and you'll see why here in a minute. The start date is the day I took out the money. All right, so if you notice here, this one, it's going to be 669 days that it accrues interest. Now, one of the things I'm going to do, I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to make this J15 absolute because I don't want that date to iterate. This date, C6, will iterate because if you notice it's changing, this one is not going to change throughout the life. So by doing that, and then I copy this, Control C, I'm going to do Control V. Watch what happens to the days, and I should see the days reduce, right? Because I'm closer to this graduation date. Now, notice I'm doing this just for unsubsidized, and the reason why I'm doing this just for unsubsidized is because those are the ones that accrue interest. Now, I've got the number of days. Now I need to calculate, okay, the running interest. How much interest is this going to generate between 9/1/2022 and my graduation date, 7/1/2024? So in my research, what I found out is that interest, although simple interest, okay, is applied daily. So let's look at this essentially by saying, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to find the daily interest rate. Okay, so the daily interest rate, now remember, it is just on this amount here, not this amount, right? So our daily interest rate equals our annual interest rate divided by the number of days in a year, annual being yearly number of days. So my daily interest rate is going to be 0.014%. All right, so now I have 0.014%. Now I need to do a calculation to figure out how much interest has accrued from the time I borrowed the money until the day I graduate. Now the way I do that is simple interest is actually pretty simple. We don't need a complex formula this. We're going to take the amount we borrowed, okay, times the number of days times which actually I just put in 8. Let's do times. There we go. Times our daily interest rate. Now, if you notice, as we look at this formula, right, there's some dynamic things that are going to change when I move this formula over, just like it did before. But I don't want this to move over, so I'm going to make that an absolute cell reference with the $B, $20. Okay? So I'm going to say, okay, and there is how much interest accrues. Now I'm going to do Control-C, Control-V, Control-V, and obviously I should see the interest reduce because I'm closer to the graduation date, thus earning, actually being charged less interest, right? Fewer days, less interest. Now, I always want to audit. The way I'm going to audit is double click here and make sure, okay, it's using this 2,000, it's using this 91 days, and it's using my daily interest rate. So the cool thing is, I know that this is correct, okay? Now from here, repayment start date, my repayment start date is actually going to be a month after my graduation date, okay? Now, in the rules you saw it says you can wait 6 months. We are not going to do that. We're not going to let interest accrue again for another whole 6 months on all of these before we start paying. We're going to be prudent and at least start paying a month after we graduate. So that's that date. Now, total amount borrowed. How much did I borrow? The total amount I borrowed, right, was each loan installment. So I'm going to say that this is going to equals the sum, okay, of, well, my first year, this, and I'm going to just do sort of a long function here. Actually, I'm not. It's going to be this range of cells, which we've done before, plus this range of cells, right? Now, if we go back and look at how much we can borrow, we can see that's 20,000. Don't worry about the penny, okay? The penny's coming up because of the distribution of this unevenly, all right? So 20,001, we're going to just keep the penny. Total interest before payment. What do we mean before payment? Well, I haven't made a payment yet, right? So all that interest we see has accrued. Now here, because there is no values that I'm going to include in these cells, I am going to do a long formula to make it very clear to anyone that would audit my calculations, which anytime you're using someone else's spreadsheet, you're responsible for it. You better audit the calculations to make sure they're correct. So I'm going to go in and say equal sum, and it's going to equal the interest all added up. So this cell plus this cell plus this cell plus this plus this plus this. Now, why didn't I just do a range, for example, of B8 through G8? Because again, there are no values here, and that might be confusing to someone auditing my formula. I'm going to close the gate on that, and there is the interest. Now, to figure out my total amount owed the day I graduate, I'm just going to take the total amount borrowed plus the total amount of interest accrued, simple interest that is accrued while I am not working. Now, here's where the confusion comes in. I couldn't find out if this is added to an overall loan and then included in simple interest, okay, the next time I make, take out a disbursement. So I want to sort of be clear on that. We're going to go with what we have here. So that I can break this up, I'm going to go ahead and pause here for part 1 and watch the other video for part 2, where we actually amortize the loan and look at our payments and what happens if we don't at least pay the interest. See you next time.